Alright, I'm going to show you how I make sauerkraut and give you a couple tips I picked up along the way. So I'm going to start with a 5-pound cabbage. I usually do red because I like the flavor a lot more, and I actually usually do what I call fire kraut. So this is red cabbage, kraut, and then all this powder in there is Korean red pepper flake. And it's not spicy, it's just got a little kick, a little warmth to it. My wife doesn't like heat at all, and she loves that stuff. And then I make stuff like this with the core of the cabbage. This is garlic and cilantro. Yeah, the Korean red pepper again, some turmeric. This stuff is awesome. It pretty much tastes like a bunch of garlic, but it's got a lot of flavor to it. Maybe I'll show how to do that in another one. So I get these jars. I get the larger ones. Right, I usually do the larger ones. There's the smaller quart. I'm not sure exactly what size they are, but these smaller ones there's ones that come with a bigger lid, and that one I just showed you with the cabbage core is a larger lid. You can't get your hand in here, which is a pain to clean. So if you do pick up new ones, look for the ones that have the wide neck. You can get your hand in there. I wash these when they're new. When you open them up, they kind of have a weird chemical smell, so I wash them real quick with just regular hand soap and try to rinse them out real good. Sometimes I'll take, if I'm worried about it, I take vinegar, pour it in this one, put the lid on, shake it around real good, get everything covered in vinegar, pour it in the next one, do that, and then I'll save the vinegar if I'm going to do it again, or I'll just dump it. A mandolin makes it a lot easier to slice because really all you're going for, it doesn't matter how you cut it up, but you just want it to be, you know, pieces that are slightly manageable when you go to eat them. Stuff like that, between that and that is fine, but any way that you can cut it that way and get it close to that, it doesn't matter. You don't want to put it in a blender though, because then you get little tiny itsy bitsy pieces, and when you put that in a jar, it all mashes together, and when these things, as the bacteria eats this, it farts technically, and that needs to get out. And if this is all mashed together, it just stays in there and expands, and then it pushes out the top and it becomes a pain. I usually clean off the first couple pieces because I'm sure there's pesticides or whatever on here. They're kind of funky pieces anyway, and as you run them down the mandolin, they're going to get ripped off anyway. That one looks kind of funky still, but you can leave that, that's no problem. You can save these. Some people put this on top to hold the stuff down. I don't usually ever mess with that. And salt real quick I'll go over. I'm going to use gray Celtic salt. This is kind of a wet salt. It's not that it's soaking wet, but you can see how it's sticking to the jar. But it's really good. It's really good on food when you add it to anything that you're eating. It has like you hit like a salt pocket. It tastes really it's interesting and different. The next one I would use is pink salt. This is going to be a bit more expensive probably, but this is next up for the Celtic. Black salt I wouldn't get into because this is just some kind of salt with activated charcoal next to it. There's really not any volcanic salt, I don't think, and most of the stuff that you can buy is just that. Don't consume this at all, and don't use it in here because this is just toxic stuff. This is why people have high blood pressure when they consume a lot of salt. This has extra stuff added to it that is no good. Alright, so what I'm going to do is grind this up. I'm going to show you. This will probably end up in fast forward, I would imagine, so we don't waste a lot of time. You can go real tiny on this, on the mandolin. I guess it's hard to see how far open this is, but I'm going to go to about there. And sometimes I adjust it to get different parts of the cabbage. As the cabbage gets thicker and stronger, I try to go thinner with the cut so it's easier to chew, but doesn't turn into, you don't want all of it to turn into super tiny stuff. I've actually done this with a drill. Something this heavy wouldn't work, but I took a smaller one. The red cabbages are smaller, and I just put a paddle bit in here and spun it against this thing. It worked all right. It made a mess, but whatever. It's not a bad idea to clean your whole area up and leave yourself a lot of space, because as you go, you're going to be pushing the cabbage off here or wherever. You want to try to keep that clean and get it in there, but as it goes on the table, you want to be able to pick this up and put it back in there. There's nothing wrong with it, but if the table's funky and not clean, you don't want to start putting weird bacteria or whatever in there. When you start on the mandolin, you just want to try to go where you're going to keep pulling it, the leaf closed, instead of pulling it, trying to pull it open each time and making a mess. Well, that's not going to work. Now this is about what you want. This is pretty thick. I'm going to probably turn it down just a little bit. What I try to do is take a side off the cabbage so then it'll fit in the mandolin again in another way, and then I can keep. Otherwise, if you try to keep going one direction, it's too wide and it doesn't fit on the mandolin, so you have to try to chop it down certain ways so you can get it to fit in there. As you can see, it starts going everywhere. I've used this thing a lot. I've only cut myself once, and of course I was drinking. There's a lot of ways to make sure that you don't put your hand anywhere near it, but don't watch me and assume that this is very easy to keep your hand away. You have to remain on top of what you're doing, and this thing is actually pretty dull by now. It's a couple years old. Actually, it's a lot of years old. Not that that really matters, because it still cuts the stuff very well. But if you haven't run one of these, be very careful. There's gloves that you can get to protect your hand, but I don't hit my hand, so I don't. When I do wear the gloves, I just get them funky with food, and I don't ever hit them. So just be careful and go slow if you're not sure how to do it. I mean, operating a knife is really the same danger at the amount of cutting that you have to do here, so this is probably safer in the long run. Just be careful. Sometimes big pieces like this come out. Don't worry about it. This is going to get pretty soft, and sometimes it's nice to get a piece like that. You don't have to go crazy turning it into super fine cut everywhere, and make sure that it's all perfect. As you get down to here, this is where I usually make it even smaller and finer, because this stuff is still good stuff, but it's very compact and dense. I may actually just save. I don't feel like doing another batch right now, so I'll probably save this and do some more of that core chop up piece I was talking about, because that was good. Alright, so you have to figure this probably weighs close to a pound. Maybe not that much, but it's a decent amount of what that cabbage was. And that cabbage may weigh less than what it was at the store from evaporating some of its liquid. It's not that old. I doubt it's that much, but still. Weights change. You don't have to go super crazy with the amount of weight that you calculate for your salt. And we're going to go over salt. That's kind of a weird thing. Or not weird, but it can be confusing at first, because there's two types of ways to salt a cabbage or a vegetable that releases liquid like this. Okay, so cabbage is full of liquid. As a vegetable grows, it just packs liquid in there. Salt pulls the moisture out of there. And what you can do with cabbage, and what a lot of people do, is they apply a certain amount of salt and it releases enough liquid that when you have your sauerkraut sitting in a jar, it's underneath liquid. It needs to remain under liquid. That's how fermentation works. So usually you can apply enough salt, the proper amount of salt, and get enough liquid, but sometimes it doesn't work because we're not using fresh veggies out of the garden. We don't know how old they are. Salt is actually pretty hard to measure the proper amount because it's all different size grains and everything. I'm sure temperature and all types of other stuff has something to do with it. Either way, what I do is I put the right amount of salt on here, I mash it around a bit, and then if I don't have enough, when I put it in the jars, then I make 2% brine, which is just water and salt, and I add that to make sure that everything goes underwater. So what we do now is, I'm gonna assume this is pretty close to 5 pounds, and 5 pounds happens to be 3 tablespoons of salt. And if you get technical, each type of salt has a different amount to get to that proper measurement, but this doesn't have to get into crazy science, so you can wing it pretty well. You can put a lot of salt, you can put a little salt. The more salt you put, the slower the fermentation goes, and the saltier the food is, obviously. And the less salt you put, the quicker it's going to go, but if you go way too low, then you get into a chance of the wrong things growing in there. That's why we're putting salt in there. Make sure that the right things grow. So I'm going to do pretty much 3 because we're pretty much 5, so I'll just go a little bit lower. Like I said, it doesn't have to be crazy, so there's no point in sitting here mathing the stuff out like mad. Celtic salt is these big, huge pieces, so it's not going to go in here and like turn everything, you know, go to liquid like it's supposed to real quick. So what I like to do is put one down and sort of mix it in there, and then get another one down and mix that in there, so I'm not just pouring it on top and everything else is, you know, not getting salt on it. So mix this around pretty good. The idea is to get the salt in contact with the cabbage, with the liquid that's in the cabbage. So that way, when it comes in contact with it, it does some magic stuff and pulls the moisture out. And that's what we want to happen here. So mix it around, mash it up a little bit. You don't have to worry about making it get mushy from doing this part. I believe the more salt you use, the crispier it's going to stay because it goes slower and you're not just rotting the food real quick. So if you like it crispy, go a little higher on the salt. I can't say don't worry, but most people don't have a problem with salt. The table salt that has the added stuff and it's been stripped down to just the sodium chloride is where tests come back saying that people have problems with salt. We need this stuff for health. I consume a lot of this every day. And so fermentation isn't, you know, if you're worried about the salt part of fermentation, give it a try. Keep an eye on your blood pressure. But it's not, the only thing that it's going to do is allow you to drink more water and probably become hydrated to the right point. So that could, in fact, I guess, raise your blood pressure a tiny amount, but not necessarily in a bad way. You should be hydrated. But we're talking about cabbage here, not hydration and salt. Some people pound the cabbage. I started doing it that way, and nothing was really happening still. Like, I still wasn't getting enough liquid from the cabbage, and I wasn't understanding what was going on. And I just, from doing it a bunch of times, I started to see what was going on, and it's just that sometimes the cabbage just doesn't release the liquid. Sometimes the salt is too large, the Celtic, so it's not making enough contact yet until the salt breaks down. Sometimes the cabbage was too dry. Something else might keep the liquid from coming out, I'm not sure, but pounding it really does nothing other than just break it up a bit, which I guess would make it a bit mushier. But I've had plenty of success getting liquid from the right cabbage without pounding it. What I usually do is just try to get some weight and mash it down without flinging it all over the kitchen, just to try to get everything in contact. And any liquid that does start coming out, that's going to be nice and salty. So as you do this, you're going to press it into places, and then it'll make its way back out, and that will hopefully help the situation. You can get an idea pretty quickly if you're going to have the right amount of liquid come from when you do what I guess is called dry salting, where we did the 3 tablespoons against the 5 pounds of vegetable. There is absolutely no liquid in the bottom. And sometimes I've had this happen where sometimes there's absolutely no liquid and it's a fresh cabbage. And I've had it where there's a ton of liquid from a cabbage that seems to be pretty old. So as they age, they might even let more go. I'm not sure. Either way, I've done it both ways and it seems fine. So my hands are freezing because the cabbage was cold. That might have something to do with it too. I'm going to show you how I put it in the jars and explain a bit of that. You don't want to stuff it in the jars because as the bacteria eat this, now there's bacteria all over this. Naturally there's bacteria on everything, in the air and on the veggies and everything. So once this is in the proper environment, which is underneath salt water, the bacteria are going to get to work and they're going to start eating this. And that's where they're going to fart and make that gas. You don't want to mash this down in there because as they do their thing, that gas comes out and stuff kind of expands a bit. So if it's all mashed down, it starts flying back up instantly and it wants to come out of the jar. And the reaction, that reaction that does that expansion only happens for like the first 3 days. But in that time, if you fill the jar up too high, you have the liquid too high, as that pressure comes up when you open it, you're spilling out a bunch of the kraut juice and you're making a mess. And then once that's over with, now the neck is all dirty and the level goes back down to normal where it wants to hang out. So it might seem like you're wasting a lot of jar space at first, but it's just a mess if you go for it. Like this here is probably pushing it. So that's as high as I'm going to go. And I'm going to bring the water up to about there. And that way, this is underneath and I have enough room to let some pressure out, hopefully without it spilling over. So that's why I go for the bigger jars, because when you go with the little jars, there's really just no room in the end. Alright, my memory card was full, and I explained a bunch of stuff, which we're going to go over again. So, we need to fill this space with salt water. That gives the proper pH and a lack of oxygen for the proper life forms to breed in here. So even though we added 3 tablespoons of salt to 5 pounds of vegetables, we didn't get enough liquid down here. And even if we mash the crap out of it, we're only going to get a tiny bit. So we're going to make brine, and we're going to fill it up to here. And these guys are going to poop and fart, more like fart. And they're going to fart out CO2. And that's why we don't want to grind it with the blender, because if it gets too little, the bubbles can't get out. See, there's plenty of spaces for bubbles to get out, which we'll see in the time lapse. So the CO2 is going to come up out of the water, and it's going to fill this up. And the oxygen that's in here is lighter, and it's going to be up top. As this keeps happening, it's going to push out all the oxygen, because we're going to leave the cap just loose enough that it can get out, or we're going to burp it for a couple days. So as long as that happens, we keep just the farts coming up and coming out here. Anything that's stuck inside here on the neck is going to be inside an oxygen-free zone, which is good enough to not make it start breathing skunk and make it, hey, stop, and end up contaminating all of this. So the problem starts with, so if when we open this and let, I guess just so I can show you. So we're going to seal this up with liquid. These are going to fart. It's going to make CO2. Pressure is going to build up. When we go like this and it farts and burps, goes psh, it's going to let oxygen out and the CO2 build up. But if we take this off and we open it and we start sticking our finger in here, the CO2 that's in here is going to get pushed out when we do that. It's going to spill over, and then when we go like that, it's going to suck oxygen and funk back in here, and things are going to land in there while we have it open. So now it's not CO2 again, and stuff that's on the neck can start getting funky and then spread to the whole thing. So what we want to do is, we don't need to tighten it like crazy, but we want to give it a good tighten seal, and then once that pressure builds up, we only let it out and then seal it again. As long as you do that, there's not a problem with pressure building up, and some people even just leave it sealed. But then I think the problem is you have a lot of oxygen up top still that can't get out. So what I do is, for about 3 days, I open it, let that pressure out, and then after about a week tops, I just seal it up. And I've never had a problem of any funk, even though I'll have stuff like that sticking up way past the liquid. It might dry out and get kind of weird, and the top layer, if the top layer sits up a bit, that'll get a little mushy, but I've never had a problem, and it's really easy. So we take our 2% brine, and we use our completely useless pouring device that does not function properly. And if I keep adding more, it'll just keep floating with it. So as long as it's above where it wanted to sit originally, that's probably enough. If the stuff expands a bit, takes up a bit more, it's going to go higher. It's going to want to go higher. So I can go, that's about as high as I want to go, because if this pressure builds up, it can bring the liquid level up high enough, believe it or not, and then when I open this, it'll spill over. So that's about what you want to do. It doesn't need to be packed down. See how it's floating? It doesn't need to be mashed in there. You just need to have it underneath the liquid and not too high up. Alright, so we're going to make 2% brine. Now, I made an app for this because it gets kind of confusing. We have the whole 3 tablespoons of salt to 5 pounds of vegetable. That's when you can mash the water out of it. Now what we're going to do is just make 2% brine as if we didn't salt that. I've never had a problem with doing it this way with over salting. In the end, it might be a waste of salt, but I don't know, it tastes fine to me. I like it. So this is the app that I made. We're going to do 2%. And since my memory card ran out, we're already on 4 cups. You can adjust that to whatever you want. You can change whatever you're using. You got UK in there, pints, quarts, whatever. So we're going to do 2%. We're doing 4 cups. We're going to do 1.1 tablespoon. We can change this also. Teaspoon, 3.4 teaspoons. So 1.1 tablespoon to 4 cups of water is going to make 2% brine. So the gray salt is already wet, so I'm not too worried about putting a wet spoon in there, otherwise it'd be kind of gross, your salt would cake out. I had a little bit of water in there, but that shouldn't be a problem. Four cups. Now, the warmer the water is, the quicker or easier it's going to dissolve. If it's really cold water, it's going to look like it's never going to dissolve. As long as you get the salt in there with the water, it's fine. As long as you don't have a pile in here after you pour it in, you should be okay. Now usually when I do this, I'll have enough water that I'm not making 4 cups of water per thing of sauerkraut. So I'll usually end up with like, you know, I'll have liquid up to here, or even it looks like it's high enough, but if you let it sit, it won't cover it after a couple days. Yeah. So what I usually do is take a piece of paper towel or something, because I'm usually doing fire kraut, so I'll have the pepper stuff up here, and I don't like getting that all over my skin, so I use paper towel and just stick it in here far enough. The neck doesn't have to be super duper clean, but it helps, because that stuff gets kind of funky up there. It dries out and gets gross. There you go. Now see, it looks like the stuff's sticking out up there, which it is. But I don't have a problem with that, and I don't want to put expensive glass weights in here that break, and I don't want to put a plastic bag in there. I didn't explain that one. That's what happened when the camera went out. So what some people do is they get like a Ziploc bag, or whatever. I've never done this because I don't have a problem with the way I do it. So they get this bag and they put it in there, and then they fill the bag with more brine. So this is full of brine, and then they put the bag in here and they fill that with brine, and it pushes. See, now you've got, it's going to go like that, and not that it's going to push stuff down like that, but whatever's there, it's going to push most of the air out, and any CO2 that comes up is going to fill up there, and it's going to, you know, be nice and in contact with CO2. So all you're doing there is just removing any space. I don't really like that idea, and what I do seems to work fine. As long as you keep this chamber full of CO2, you're good. What some people do is buy airlocks, which is a special cap that has a doohickey on top, which is just a one-way valve. It allows the CO2 to come out, but it doesn't let the oxygen go back in. And that's the same thing as I'm doing, where I just loosen the cap, let the CO2 get out when it has pressure, and then I close it so no air gets back in. I never open it so air gets back in. And it works great, and it doesn't cost anything. And then I'm not putting plastic on my food. Alright, so it's actually been 2 days since we chopped all this stuff up and put it in jars. That was Sunday. It's now Tuesday around noon. I checked these last night, or all day yesterday, and I wasn't getting any pressure yet. You can tell by pushing in on the metal lids, you can feel resistance or not. See, it's like got pressure to push back. I actually have to push down a decent amount. On ones that don't have any pressure left, there's no, like this one's sucked in, like I said, after a while they pull pressure back in, so they don't. Sometimes they'll do that too. That's not horrible, but a lot of times they'll suck back in. I probably just didn't burp that at the end. So I'm just gonna open it a tiny bit to let that out and listen to what it does, so you have an idea of what you're doing when you burp them. That's it. On the first day or two, you won't really get too much activity. That one didn't have much at all. See, now you can get an idea with that metal lid how much pressure is backed up. So this is now the third day that they've been sitting. The second time we're gonna burp them. You can see it's starting to float, and this one here the foam line is right there. So as this burps, it's probably going to come up even higher. This one's getting close to needing to go over the sink to be opened. Alright, it is now Friday. I skipped yesterday. That one probably wasn't sealed all the way because that wasn't much. I was expecting more. Alright, so this one will probably be okay. And this one, we'll probably hear it try to come out. Yep. If you go slow, you can get it. I released enough pressure. I'm just going to leave it there a little bit. Trying to drip down, but it's not enough to worry about. That's why I usually leave at least some kind of paper towel here. That way, if one of them, sometimes they'll build up enough pressure and these don't seal well enough that they'll leak a little bit. And if you don't realize it, then you just start getting puddles of funk all over. And if you do it on this cheap wood, you'll ruin it. Some of these will get, what I'll do is they'll end up where the liquid is pretty far down, but the cabbage is way up there from the way that the bubbles bring it up. So I'll make sure it's tight, flip it over. The cabbage wants to float again, so it'll make its way back up a little bit, and then if you carefully turn it back over, see how it's a little bit lower now? But if you don't have to do that, you know, I try to wait until I'm not going to open it anymore, which is getting pretty close here, because I got the cap all wet now with salt water, so that's going to help make some funk. But you can tell how much lower it is. So I'll probably do it to these guys once they're definitely sealed up. I wouldn't do it to this one because that's just going to make a mess when you have little fine particles like that, so you get pieces stuck. Alright, it's now Saturday. It's pretty warm outside. I'm surprised it's only 70 in here. I figured these might have a little extra pressure today. So tomorrow will probably be the last day I burp them. It seems like they're almost leveled out. Alright, so it's been a week since I bottled these up. It's Sunday again. And as I expected, there's not too much pressure built up in these guys by now. They'll probably let out a little bit, and I'll show you what a little bit of pressure sounds like. See it, like, it just barely let anything out, and that's probably, I mean, that's the last time you want to open it. After that, opening it is most likely going to pull in. That one had a little bit of pressure, probably because it's all chopped up. Still got a little bit. So that's it. I'm not going to open them anymore because there's really no need.